Thank you all for attending and welcome to the latest edition of the Zero to One show, where we discuss your journey into the Filecoin ecosystem, how to get started, what are the tips, tricks, best practices for taking your business from the 0 to 1 part. And we hope you all enjoy our special guest today, Bill Schreckenstein. Welcome to the show. How are we doing today?
I'm good, man. How are you doing, Porter? How are you doing, Bob?
Go ahead, Bob.
Well, I'm excited about it. I mean, we're interviewing the guy who interviewed me when I was joining PL, so it's time to grill him back.
Yeah.
Wow. Come on. Be gentle, guy. I was gentle when I
Of
interviewed you.
course,
Be gentle. Come on. Come
you
on.
you were you were. We will.
Yeah, and it's been a year since I've joined the foundation. Just had my year anniversary this month, and I just had flashbacks to getting up to speed on Filecoin, either preparing for my interview or onboarding, trying to figure out what this Filecoin thing really was. And I must have watched your ESPA video 3 times in a row because it was my favorite. So,
Well, ESPA's a really cool experience, and one of the things that I've really appreciated, because I've been there a few times, right? I mean, we met up at a couple. The thing that I like about it is it's evolved, and it's so much more than it was when it first got started. I think the program is on the right track. Ultimately, it's continuing to bring in the materials that matter, and they've had some really great guest speakers, and I think the accelerator has evolved to the point where you can't deny the effectiveness of ESPA. I think that it will continue to grow, it will continue to get better, but really, where else are you going to find programs like that where it's like, I mean, unless you're buying a franchise that comes in and says, hey, let us help you build a business, and let's show you how to do this. It's a very rare and I think special aspect of the ecosystem, because without it, you're flying blind, and that's why I've always loved it. It's a great experience, and I love going. Look, Vegas is a hoot, man. It's a lot of fun, but hanging out with a lot of the people in the ecosystem, it's been very educational. It's enlightening, and honestly, there's a lot of enjoyment for folks, even when times are tough. Even now, you still meet with SPs, and we still meet internally and externally. We have third party partners, and people are still laughing and enjoying, and yeah, there's your fair share of stress, but all in all, you're going to be hard pressed to find a group of people this interested in changing the way we do something very fundamental, which is store data.
Yeah. So Shrek, I want to get started with this question, because most of the people on this call are new to the ecosystem.
Okay.
They may not know your legendary status. So why don't you introduce yourself and what you're up to within Filecoin today for the newbies of the call.
All right. So really, I'm not a legend. I was just here early, right? I got lucky, right? I had a guy, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, Stefan Vervat, right? We had a long working history. He was like, hey, come join me here. It's going to be fun. I didn't realize the fun he was talking about. It's kind of evolved into different types of fun, but I started with the foundation, much like yourself, Porter, in November of 2021. Started doing a lot of work on helping to get SPs up and running, because, and we were talking about this earlier, right before everyone jumped on, when I started looking at PL and started talking to folks at PL, Phil was around $80, right? And now you look at the token price. That's how far along this has kind of gone. And I've been able to work under the guys of the foundation as an architect, much like Bob. I had a chance to go over and do some engineering management, and that's where I am now in PL. And we're working on really bringing solutions to bear that will hopefully help accelerate revenue generation for SPs. But it's been one heck of a ride. I've had the honor and the privilege to work with a lot of great people, specifically the ESPA folks, a lot of SPs, even third-party vendors. You've got the N Clouds and the Sendatas and the Hypermedias of the world. They're all bringing unique ideas and tech to the sector, and watching it evolve has been really cool. That's the one thing that has been really awesome, is watching when I started in November of 2021 to today, how much it's changed. And I remember data onboarding when I was an architect, when I first got started, it was like, what do we do? Well, we've got estuary over here. Oh, what if estuary doesn't work? Well, we got to create a relationship with an SP, work directly with SP. The solution set just wasn't where it is today. And if you really consider what has been developed over this 18 to 20 month span, that you're if folks are really paying attention, if you looked at what has been developed and put together, solutions are coming out at such a prolific rate that in my opinion, because of the thousands of developers contributing to the network, you're going to see more and more impact. And I do think you'll see more and more opportunity. And it's that growth, the contributor growth, that has really been impressive to see, and the tooling that has come out of all of this. So it's a lot different. Even when I joined 20 months ago, it's significantly different, and it's been one heck of a ride to watch.
Shrek, your comments remind me of a famous business cartoon where it's like a little stick figure and he's looking up at this very steep mountain peak that he's yet to climb. And he's like, I can't. It's just so ridiculously steep and hard. But then the next frame is he looks down at the mountain that he's climbed, and then he says, I have. And it's just, it's always interesting. We get so caught up in the day-to-day weeds of Filecoin. It's really hard for us all to take a time out and look just about how much has been built and accomplished over what is relatively a short amount of time. And yeah. I think we all kind of take that for granted.
We do, and I think a lot of it is we're distracted by the price shock of Phil, right? We've seen the Phil price come down, but if you look at the economy in general, everything is dropping, right? Biddy's back down. All of the cryptos are down. No one's running an ATH right now. No one's running at their all-time high. I think we get lost in what has really been accomplished because we feel like there's a psychology to this. Oh, the Phil token's low, despair, right? They have the feed in the fear and the greed index, when they talk about crypto. And I think we're so distracted by seeing a price decline in Phil that we haven't really looked at all of the things that have evolved, mainly because we're worried about the bottom line, how much money is in our coffers. But ultimately, everybody who's in this space has some familiarity with crypto. We all understand the cyclical nature, specifically of the value. And I think a lot of us are just sitting here going, okay, we weather this winter, we get through this storm, things are going to take off for us. And I firmly believe for quite a few folks in the ecosystem that will happen. We talk about
one of the things that I love about the 0 to 1 audience is a term that was coined by Nathan Dragon, who was our guest a couple months back. It's called the storage provider 2.0. And these are people entering the ecosystem in the teeth of a bear market. And I see they have the advantage, of not having some of the experiences that some of the original storage providers have had. And they're building in this new way. As you said, all these new things have changed over just the last 9 months since you've left the foundation as a solution architect.
Yep.
And, I'm curious, as we bring you back on the show, what are some of those advancements or innovations that really stand out to you as kind of game changing, that kind of set up this whole new mindset persona of what it means to be a 2.0 storage provider?
Well, I think they come in different flavors. Obviously, they come in different sizes. But when I look at 2.0, if I really look at, I'm coming in as an SP now, one of the things that has been brought to the network, and you can call it an innovation, but I call it more of it's really a service. The as a service offerings that we've brought to bear, I do think have a significant value for folks coming in new. Because if you think about it, and I remember when I started and we were working with SPs on builds, and it was like, oh, put this GPU here, and you've got this node here, and your storage here, and you start doing cost estimations and rollups, and it's a significant amount of money. Now, the price of Phil was higher. The block rewards allowed you to sustain that cost. But now as the price of Phil comes down, we have to find ways to reduce the barrier for entry. So having folks with all of these services where you can pay for what is palatable, or you pay for what you can afford, whether it's ceiling. I mean, we're going to get to a point where we're going to have people hosting warm storage and, charging almost like a cash provider fee. I do see a lot of these things coming to bear, and these as a service offerings allow you to pay by the drink. pay for what you can afford, run what you can afford, and not have to go out and figure out all the CapEx load that a lot of the people that came before us had to suffer through, right? And if you go back and you read the early articles and you look at space rates, what's everybody talking about? Oh, I spent 20 grand on this rig, and I spent 40 grand on these Seagate disks. And now it's like, well, if I want to seal data, I don't have to go out and buy all the GPUs. I can use the sealing as a service offerings that have been born out of this network. And I think that reduction in friction allows SPs to bootstrap and stay viable even while the token price is low. And even now you have folks like Angelo Shalley. He goes around and talks to folks about charging for fiat and having that supplemental revenue stream. Those things weren't discussed in open air when I started on the foundation in 2021. All of this stuff has been evolved, and it's come out of need, and it's come out of response to the macro economy. So ultimately, for those that look at the price of Phil and they get discouraged, it's hard, right? It's the basis of your business. There's a reduction in block rewards. It's the basis of your business. But all of those things,
sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Bob.
I think you make a couple of valid points in the sense that .1 or 1.0 SPs had a hard time figuring it all out. They had no tooling, they had no reference architectures, they had nothing. They had to just really get into it and figure it out. But the fill price was high, so that was an incentive. What you have today is there's ever more tooling. It's far from perfect, but there's ever more tooling and programs and a reference architecture. So there's less of the steep learning curve ahead of you, but you have to prepare for the long term. And so, how would you encourage people to like go in with a mindset? I'm not getting rich in 3, 6, 12 months, but I'm doing this for the long term. What would be your idea for that?
I think the hardest part ultimately is going to figure out, your revenue streams and how they'll map essentially to business growth. You have this thing where it's a deterministic drop in block rewards. Phil is at a low price right now. We would all love to see it higher. Let's not fool ourselves, right? $20 fill, and a lot of the conversations that take place in the ecosystem aren't even being had. So that tells me ultimately that right now is that huge elephant in the room, that huge distraction. But as these other SPs start coming to the network and we start figuring out the fiat on-ramp solutions and enabling them to offer auxiliary services. I mean, when I started, Backyao wasn't even in existence, right? There was no compute offering. Compute over data was like a pipe dream. To have that now as a potential offering in literally 12 months for an SP that is looking to start a cloud business, that is huge, right? All of these things are different ways that you can monetize and create revenue streams. So the first thing you want to figure out, if I'm an SP, it's where's my reach? Do I have data owners that I can instantly approach and bring data in? And if it's not, what programs can I leverage at PL to essentially guarantee that I'm bringing in data? Data is the lifeblood of the network. As Porter, you and I have had discussions about, right? Remember the CC minor calculations and how it's good to have the block rewards and why you want to use Phil Plus versus CC sectors and how that impacts your bottom line. You have to do a lot of math and it's painful, right? Do you want to go OpEx and use services right now so that your cash committal up front is low? Do you fundraise? Where does the money come from? There's so many different variables that go into making a business. So the first thing I want to look at is, where's my revenue going to come from? Because if I can't sit down and honestly say, I'm bringing revenue from here, I don't have a sustainable business model. So it's, do I have connections in the storage space? Do I know companies, enterprises, or even research institutions are going to start their data with me? And if so, how much? How quickly can I grow this? Because as I start down this journey, specifically if I'm building my own infra, scaling this stuff can be a pain. It can be difficult. And there's a steep learning curve. I mean, even now, we still talk to folks about things like how to configure ZFS or, Seaweed FS has entered the ecosystem. We on FTT, we were using Moose FS and all of these different build permutations that exist. What's the best way to go about this based on what I have available in terms of cash, right? Do I want to build my own storage? And do I want to have a mix? Do I want to have my compute be leased? Do I want to buy my storage so I don't have to go through at the end of a lease and do a forklift, lift and shift of my data and go through a migration period? There are all these questions that you have to be willing to ask yourself. And yeah, you're right. If you walk into this thinking I'm going to be rich in 6 months, that's not what this is about. And a lot of the conversations that we had early on with miners were, well, how do I mine this coin? It's like,
Yeah.
not mining. And that term gets overused. I get really excited when people start talking about how they're going to build their storage, because it's something that we as people, and I don't mean we in this ecosystem, but we as people really take for granted storage. I stick all these documents on my laptop and I just assume they're safe. And it was like that for years, right? I remember the horror when I was in college and I had a gateway computer, hard drive dies. I'm like, oh my God, it was like the end of the world, right? Now imagine you're a multi-million-dollar business and that's your data, right? We take for granted the idea of data protection and data storage. And, ultimately, we as an ecosystem are really looking to build a solution at an insane scale, because let's face it, global storage, that's an insane scale. I don't care what network you are, whether you're talking Filecoin or Storage A or any of these, Barweave, whatever. When you're building a network at global scale, that is a very difficult challenge. And you as an SP, you're a part of that cog. So you can bet if I'm looking to be an SP, I'm weighing my CapEx, my OpEx. I'm having conversations with other SPs in the ecosystem. I'm taking advantage of every piece of information at my disposal. ESPA, you guys are doing a great job with the 0 to 1 with the website, right? And how to become an SP. And I'm gonna analyze my risk tolerance. I'm gonna look at how much capital can I raise. I want to look at how fast I want my burn rate to be. What other services can I offer? Because if I can charge for compute services and I know I have that auxiliary revenue stream, my risk tolerance is going to be, higher, because I know I'm bringing in money from another source. So these are all things that I think about if I'm going to sit down and start this business. And obviously I'm going to want to go to guys who have started at 0. Bob, you've done it. You just recently did it, right? You just built your own miner. I'm going to go to the guys and say, how hard was it? What knowledge do I need? Because that's the one thing that got glossed over very early on. And remember, Bob, we were making the deck that kind of formed this whole idea. It was, what do I need to know to be an SP? Nobody talks about the marketing and the business development and all of those things. It becomes, I'm building a node and I'm putting it on network. Hey, no, it's a lot more than that. And these are all things that I have to think about under my cost umbrella.
Yeah, I'd love to just double click on this, because Shrek, you and I used to talk about this ad nauseum 9 months ago, which is know thyself. And it all depends on the skills and experience that you're bringing to the table. And then, what I think is exciting about becoming a storage provider today is your opportunities for outsourcing to the areas where you don't have that expertise.
That's right.
Are more prevalent than ever. So, like, what are go through your breakdown of what are the areas of expertise that someone would need to become a storage provider?
That's I guess here's the question I'm going to ask that individual. Someone come up to me and said, what skills do I need? I'm going to say, how far do you want to take this? Because if I'm looking at it as, I want this to be my own little mini cloud business, I want to offer all these services, then you got to sit down and look at, you're going to need sales, marketing, BD. You're going to need an engineering team with strong, Linux skills. You're going to want a storage admin that knows how to build out storage platforms that can service things like window post, winning post. All these things are important. You're going to want to have folks that, prime example is you look at a picnic, right? VP of finance, you've got a CTO, you have software developers working on innovative solutions. You have your engineering staff running your SP. They have infra as a service. They're coming up with ways to generate revenue so that they essentially aren't just a one-trick pony. And part of knowing themselves was knowing who to hire, who to bring in, and how to build out a fully competent staff that can tackle all the different aspects that a cloud service provider would need to tackle. That's including sales and marketing. Those are aspects that are overlooked by SPs that are bootstrapping, but ultimately being able to get out and sell what you're delivering is extremely critical if you really want prolific growth. So those are the aspects I think that get overlooked, that business BD sales component. And then sometimes the storage component gets overlooked. We just think we can just fire up an array and everything's going to be hunky-dory, and it's not. You're going to want a strong storage administrator. You're going to want a strong Linux administrator to harden your environment, understand your network. There are so many different components that I mean, look, we say it all the time, you're building a mini Amazon, you're building a mini Google. You have to have all of those different domains of knowledge, or you're going to have a very difficult struggle. Now, what I will say about the ecosystem is typically you can ask a question and someone will answer it. You get on Slack or you need help. I found that people are very amenable to helping, working, creating unique solutions, even working together. And it's refreshing because you don't have businesses, fighting over clients. They're typically sharing them, right? I mean, imagine going to Amazon and Microsoft saying, "Hey, you guys okay with sharing this data? You each get a copy." They'll be like, "No, we want it all," right? And here, that is taken out of the equation. So it forces I don't want to say it forces, but it creates an environment somewhat where you have a lot more collaboration and a lot more shared learning. Where, if you go out of this ecosystem and someone does something innovative, they don't sit down and say, "Here, let me share this with you." It's, "What are you going to pay me to gain this knowledge?" Well, that's not what happens here. We have SPs working together, helping each other. So really, if I'm also bootstrapping an SP, I'm going to want to know who the hardcore SPs are. I'm going to want to know who on that staff can provide different aspects of knowledge that maybe I'm coming up short in, and those are areas you can tap into. And people are usually in this ecosystem very open for sharing and deliberating. So I think that also is important, right? Is understanding the players in the ecosystem and where their strengths are.
Very true. We talked a bit about, or we talked elaboratively about what changed over the last couple of years and how for an SP getting into the network, it became to some extent easier, to some extent more challenging. Apart from price level of the token, what would be, in your opinion, the bigger challenges in joining today, and how do you see those getting solved in the future?
So if I throw economics out of the equation, the biggest challenge today would probably, in my opinion, be ensuring you have the right mix of staff. If you're going to do this and you're going to do enterprise and you want to be, I want to say it's not a matter of legitimacy, but if you want to be really recognized, I think you have to bring all of those different pieces to bear. So it's, as an SP, if I'm ignoring revenue, I'm ignoring price, it's really building out the right team, right? Because if I can do that and I have all of these different boxes checked and I have all of this different domain knowledge, I'm going to make less mistakes inherently. Now, if I look at it from a technical perspective, you said, Shrek, technically, what challenges do you see? I don't see I think today, if I look at significant technical challenges, I think they're being addressed by the ecosystem. We're working on them, right? But I do see downstream the idea of scaling. And I think we also kind of gloss over that idea. As these SPs get bigger, how is that storage going to scale? As you add more compute, how are you going to manage that? I think the big challenge as this network grows, because make no doubt, it is growing. The real challenge is going to be figuring out how to operate at varying levels of scale and how to scale up properly, whether it's horizontal or vertical. I don't care. It's not going to be easy because ultimately, you look at any cloud provider, right? There's an inherent challenge in building out these huge data lakes for insane volume. We will be learning that as we go. And I think for some, it's going to be very difficult. It's going to be a challenge. But I feel like there's so much talent in this ecosystem that we can rise to meet that challenge. We just haven't had to bite that carrot yet necessarily, but it's coming. It is coming.
You hit the nail on the head with, I mean, first wave of the network was growing capacity, figuring out how all the stuff works. Second wave is bringing customers and data. So you need other skills, and you also get other personas into the ecosystem with their own requirements, which brings another challenge for SPs to live with. So yeah, good answer.
And that's why I think understanding who you are and what customers you want to go after are so important, right? Even things like certifications. Do I want to be SOC 2? ISO 27K? Do I want HIPAA? You know, are those the types of data sets I really want to be responsible for and go after and have insight into? The answer is yes. That becomes an important part of your business model. I've got to get the certification. I've got to hire the right staff. If I want to be HIPAA compliant, all my staff has to be HIPAA trained, right? So all of these things need to be considered. And it's a lot of math and it's a lot of thought. But that's why I think what Bob, you and Angelo have done with the 0 to 100, right? We started with a deck. You're building a site. These things are so important. And understanding all these concepts, if I'm going to build an SP, ultimately super important. I can't ignore BD and sales just because it's not my background. Or if I'm a Linux admin, I can't ignore storage because that's critical. If I'm a storage admin and I don't care about Linux, that's not going to fly either. I need that compute. So these are all things that should be considered as part of your decision-making process. Is it impossible to start an SP? No. People have done it, right? We have over 3,000, almost 4,000. It's harder today, in my opinion, because of the macro economy, right? Because you're sitting there going, hey, you know, Phil's not at 80. I can't go out and get a bunch of block rewards and instantly buy hardware. So we have to be more creative. And in many ways, the solutions have got more creative, right? You have folks like Greater Heat doing ceiling as a service. I don't have to bear the cost of going out and acquiring all these GPUs anymore. So it's cool, right? I pay for what I can afford. I see what I can afford. I collect the block rewards on what I can afford. It's manageable. It's not ideal, but it's manageable. And that, I think, gives a lot of hope for future folks entering this ecosystem, because there will be more coming. It's only a matter of time.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. And if I were to predict what wave 3, and using Bob's terminology, it's going to be getting to the full end-to-end solution. And I don't think one entity or organization is going to own an end-to-end solution. It's going to be an amalgamation of these niche players that, when put together, gets to that AWS parity. And then once I think we can reach a level of parity with the major public cloud providers, that's where I think our ecosystem can out-innovate on an ongoing basis, because we're open, because we're collaborative. And, you know, this is what I learned from IBM. It's like, you always wanted an ecosystem where you could get the best products or services or tools out there into your ecosystem and let the free market decide whether they're valuable or not. And I do think that's what we're positioned to obtain once we get to that base level of parity. And what I see is, you know, in a continuation from these themes we're talking about, is everyone specializing. If you don't want to do sales, that's fine. You can partner with an organization that has a bunch of sales agents and can drive traffic to your business. You can focus on the storage part. You can focus on the compute part. You can focus on, you know, there's a lot of different ways that you can be a niche player today that didn't exist or weren't even on the radar 9 months ago when Shrek kind of moved on to a new role within Protocol Labs. And that's what I think, like, we don't talk about that enough, and like how fast the conversation has evolved this year alone. So Shrek, I'd love to get your perspective on, when you look at, like, how do we reach that, like, public cloud parity? What are some of the major things that we need to be focused on building from an ecosystem to perhaps get to that level?
I don't think we need to. And here's what I'll say. We have a series of SPs that function as mini providers. I don't want someone being the size. I don't want an SP the size of Google. Now, it's great for that SP, but it's also detrimental to the network, or can be detrimental to the network. So what I would love to see is essentially parity and growth, where SPs are all growing, maybe not at the same rate, but they're showing advancement. That's where, as all the SPs, we always talk about, you know, the tide rising all boats, right? But it's true. In this network, for the network to have parity or to reach parity with a public cloud, I see it as all of the SPs are showing growth, or there's some type of, or a large set of SPs are showing some form of growth. And it doesn't even have to be linear, right? Because ultimately, your Armadas are not working with just one vendor, all your eggs in the basket. And I do think that if we want the network to be able to compete with a Google or AWS, it requires all these SPs to elevate. You can't have one SP be like Google.
Right.
I mean, could Google be an SP? Sure, if they want to, but I think that's detrimental to the network. Hopefully that answers your question.
I mean, there's no one answer to that question. But I think what the network looks like in 3 to 5 years is a topic that is not discussed enough. And like, what is a full, and just the concept of what a full end-to-end solution looks like is also enlightening, because the trend towards specialization is, this is where the opportunities are within the network. And we started this conversation with ESPA, and to me, what I love about ESPA is really it's a place for those interested in the ecosystem to understand how Filecoin works. And from that event, they have conviction they leave with conviction on where their opportunity resides as it relates to their skill set and experience. So they may come up with something that, frankly, has never been thought of before, but they just see that swim lane that they can focus on. And, when we talk about what's happening or what we see 3 to 5 years from now and what this network could be, I think that allows people to have their own discussions and brainstorms on how do they contribute a verse, how do they create a specialized business model to really help achieve that next level.
Right. Well, I mean, that was one of the cool things. I think, I can't remember if it was the ESPA that we attended together, or maybe it was a different one, but I used to do this use case discussion, right? And I look at it as, background familiarity. I had a coworker, they had the concept of reduction to the familiar, where if you can explain something in like terms, something I'm familiar with, I can grasp that concept much better. I always revert to a mean. And if you have people that are passionate about, let's say, medicine or sports or whatever it is, right? I mean, we even have an SP. They were actually an ESPA participant. They were working with South Korean financial institutions in California, and that was, that's they're comfortable. That's their knowledge base. That's where they want to play. So I'm going to build.
There's the option to converge, like John writes on the chat, like, okay, let's bring together multiple types of personas and organizations and build this business together as a storage provider. And I cannot do everything myself, but I can partner up with other people who can do other stuff to together be that storage provider entity. So there's a lot more flexibility and options out there than people would even consider at first.
Oh, I agree. And then you look at even just within our own ecosystem, right? So, Bob, you come to me and say, hey, I want to do, let's say, life science or genomics data, and it has PII. I can say, all right, well, here's nCloud, we encrypt. Here's your point where you write, go, right? And, make your deals, collect your data.
Yeah.
I think that you're seeing, and this is the other thing that's changed in the last 9 months, right? 9 months ago, or even a year ago, nCloud was in its infancy. There was no hypermedia. All of these guys are now coming out. There was no Taubyte. There was no Backyao. All of this stuff now coming in is just one more form of enablement for you to go after things that maybe you weren't going to go after before. And, I think people are seizing these opportunities, and I think there are more to be had. I mean, even with hypermedia now, what prevents me as an SP from building my own YouTube? Nothing. And if I'm an M&E guru and I understand things like transcode, render, and all the other stuff that go into it, I'm going to say, wow, I could actually build a business here, right? Even that's the other thing. I would, in retrospect, there used to be businesses. There was one here near me in Atlanta. It was called Crawford. Their whole thing was taking the old magnetic media, the reels and spools of tape, and they were essentially transcoding and then making digital copies, right? So this is how important storage is. I'm going to tell you guys a story. So they had all these pods, and it was XFS, they were Linux XFS. Well, apparently they weren't very well maintained, and the file system crashed, and they lost all that data. It cost them millions to recover, because if you look at the labor hours spent, the gear, all of the things that went into that solution, it was just a huge sink. They lost all this money because the file system just crapped out. So for people to overlook storage and treat it as not important, it's a complete farce, right? So now imagine, what if I had a cloud target there that I was writing all this data to, right? Now I'm not out all this money because my storage, just literally petered out on me. So if I'm an M&E guy, I'm going to say, hey, there's an opportunity. I can go in lieu of these firms. I can start doing transcode or whatever else for a lot of these firms and preserve it on Filecoin. And guess what? They're not out millions because someone had a storage snafu.
Yeah. And that's both a shout out to SPs to go after those use cases, go after your network and have them come to you or come to the network, as well as to those people in those businesses. Like, there's other means to store your data than going with the very expensive solutions. So it works both ways. Yeah.
Absolutely. If I'm going to be an SP, I'm going to think about where's the data? M&E, genomics, finance. Where's the data, and what language do I speak? If I'm well versed in M&E, the first thing I'm going to do is say, those are going to be my target enterprises. Tons of data, right? Because you make a movie, and then they'll have 60 different rendered copies for, let's say, different languages. One of the coolest things I ever sat in on was an M&E talk, and they were talking about movie development, right? So, for instance, in I think it was the movie Moana, I think was the example that they used. The girl's eating spinach and she spits it out, right? And why is that seminal, right? Kids here in the United States, spinach, good for you, blah, right? But in other cultures, kids love it. So what they do for other cultures is they'll re-edit the movie and they'll use a different food, like pizza or ice cream, like, it's bad for you, blah, spit it out. They have to have unique versions of all these different movies. And these movies are several gigs in size. Obviously now with 4K to 8K, soon 12K, you're going to see this evolution in growth, because the files get larger and larger and larger. And now you've got to have 60 copies of these movies. These are areas where people can really learn the language, learn the workflows, and be able to speak and articulate a solution that they're building around those workflows and how they can be incorporated for these enterprises to use. And then you get into the stories of, if I'm an SP, we were actually, I think, Bob, you were on the call yesterday, right? We were talking to an SP, and it's like, well, if I'm an SP and I have my compute co-located with essentially my storage, I could save my users tons of money just on bandwidth fees, right? Like, if I put data in Amazon, I start running compute and I start getting bills. I mean, I've heard the horror stories, and now I can differentiate myself because I'm putting my compute, I'm co-locating with the data. I'm not charging you to access your data every bit, byte, and drop. You can start penetrating those markets. And I do think the opportunities will continue to grow. And I think the use cases will continue to grow, specifically as we add things like layer 1, layer 2 CDNs over the top of the network. It's going to change the axiom and our approach to our customers. And we'll be able to approach them in a completely different way.
Shrek, we're almost at time here, but I wanted to get this one final question in, then I'll get you out of here. If you could leave our audience who are just entering the ecosystem with one piece of advice or insight, what would it be?
Ask a lot of questions and take a ton of notes. One of the things that has been great is, if I don't know something, I can ask somebody. I can get on the phone with a Bob Dubois or an Angelo Shalley or a Porter Stowell or a Paul Wagner or a Vanessa Sugarito and say, hey, I'm trying to figure this out. Do you know the answer, or who do I talk to? And ask. No one, I'm hard pressed to find people in here that won't help you. That's the hardest thing about the ecosystem, is finding someone that's going to say, no, I won't help you. Don't be scared to ask questions. Ask, take copious notes, understand the information, and talk to other SPs who've been here and walked this line before you. Because most of them, actually, I can't think of one that wouldn't be honest with you and say, here's where I've had trouble, here's where I've had success, and here's what I'm doing today. ASPA is one of the greatest SP mind shares that you will come across. because you can go to ESPA, you could ask them, hey, how do I handle this situation? What are you doing for BD? What are you doing for marketing? I mean, even the ESPA program itself, right? Part of the output is collateral to help SPs, to enable SPs to go sell. So use these events, ask questions, don't be bashful. If you assume you know it all, or if you assume you're going to be chided for asking a question that you feel is simple, but you're embarrassed to ask, don't be. There's so many different skill levels in the ecosystem. There's so many different layers of experience, and just you have a lot of storage OGs. I see John Cykerbike is in the chat. He's a storage OG. I can talk to him about file systems, rate setups, ZFS. I can get answers, and he's very forthcoming, right? So ask, take notes, do your homework. I think people early on, I think people were so enamored with the idea of crypto mining, right? And they were joining the network just to mine coins. For the SPs that are still around, this is now a storage religion, in my opinion. They're past this phase of, I want to get rich mining a crypto. They're in this for the long haul. They've made a significant commitment and they're building. And those are the guys you want to talk to, the guys who have the scars, have been through the wars, and can really point you in a general direction, or even give you very detailed, comprehensive answers. It's going to vary depending on who you talk to. But I would be asking a lot of questions. I would use events like ESPA as a format to go and kind of use that as my blueprint for bootstrapping. Because now if I'm going through all of this and I have all this experience at my fingertips, my likelihood for success increases.
Well,
Bob, I don't know what we're going to add to that.
I can only echo that. I mean, amen for that. We're all in this for learning new technology, and eventually we're building the new internet. So nobody said it was easy. Okay, it's going to be a bumpy road, and sometimes it is bumpy. But I mean, we're in this for the bigger purpose of a better internet, after all. So yeah, that's what I'm still believing in.
And it's a good belief, fundamentally. And I don't want people to panic when I say this, but there's no guarantee that any of the networks that are out there, whether it's Filecoin, whether it's Arweave or Storj, any of them, there's no guarantee that these networks are going to survive. But what we're doing is setting a precedent and really establishing what we hope to be the nature of data preservation in the future. So much data gets lost. So many things are forgotten or just destroyed. And we, as whether you think of us as a species or just a large group inhabiting this planet, we've lost a lot of knowledge. And these networks, while they're hard, cumbersome, difficult to scale, and very challenging, they are really the future of data preservation. And that's where I see us having this terrific hope, right? There are things we're going to have to figure out, whether it's ACLs for access, or working on those cache tiers, or having a better, I want to say, endpoint strategy for data ingest and egress. But really today, what we're trying to tackle is so difficult that I think it sets a very high standard for data preservation in the future. And I got to be honest with you, it's exciting to be a part of. You go back and look at what S3 became when it started out in 2007, 2008, right? A lot of people are like, I need an API to store data. What the hell? Now it's like the boilerplate gold standard for cloud, right? Every time you have this new technology come, there's an adoption curve. And we're climbing a very steep adoption curve because of the nature in which data is preserved on this network and presented on this network. It's going to be a steep curve. But I do feel like as we get further along in the curve, the sun will continue to rise and it will continue to set, and we'll go day to day, and the network will continue to grow. And that's really the most important thing that we could ask for in this ecosystem.
That is just the perfect punctuation on what's been a super interesting conversation. Final note on my end, we have a link to ESPA in the chat. We also have a link to Phil Vegas in the chat. These events will be in the same location at the same time. So I encourage you to register for both. As we said, we continue to say on this call, there is no better way to find out to discover your path within Filecoin, then ESPA, and to leave with the conviction you need to go execute on that model. We have a very robust agenda planned for Phil Vegas. You can participate in D-Store. You can participate in ESPA. There's going to be so many people from the ecosystem there with discussions on AI, decentralized storage, client opportunities, sales opportunities, use cases, tools, software, development, everything we are putting under one roof in one location. So please register for both ESPA and Phil Vegas, and we hope to see you there. And we will see you next month for another 0 to 1. Thank you.
Anybody wants to rap with me, I'm Shrek on Slack, and look forward to talking to you.
Thank you both. Thanks, Bob.
Bye,
Thanks,
guys.